Real Estate Investing 101. We take it for granted we're in the business. We get to see investments all the time, but today we're going to break down into bite-sized pieces what it's like to invest and potentially purchase your first investment property. Stay tuned.
The Den, powered by the Lyons Group, a show dedicated to exploring hot topics in real estate, local happenings, and industry trends. We're a small team of professionals approaching $400 million in sales and nearly 2,000 local transactions. You're listening to time-tested experts and industry leaders. Here's a refreshing look at real estate happenings and more. Welcome to The Den.
Hello, welcome to The Den. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about investing 101, real estate investing, as we're all realtors here. Before we get into that, let me introduce my good friends, my partners, my fellow realtors. To my left, Paul, Hammy the Rockberry, Melissa, let's go, Glasgow, Aspen, the Ninja Gruen, and Shannon, the boss, Martin Martinez. And my name is Ben Lyons. Welcome to today's episode of The Den, where we are top brokers taking on tough questions. And today we're going to be discussing investing and Investments 101. You may have wanted to invest in real estate, and I hope you have. And it seems like a daunting task to a lot of people. It really is. But once you get in there and you can break it down into bite-sized pieces, it's really not that bad. So I think that's going to drive the discussion today. So Aspen, you want to kick us off since you've had many investments in your career, and that is really one of your biggest veins is investing in single family, potentially multifamily, doing VRBO. I call it VRBO, but vacation rentals. Why don't you kick us off into some thoughts in the investing world?
Sure. I was thinking this morning, I was like, there's so many different ways to invest. There's big ways, smaller ways, if you just want to donate a little bit of money into something else or go in with other people. So I was trying to break down what to talk about because there really is so many options. And my thought came back to, if I was just starting, what would I want to know and what do I wish I would have done differently? So I was kind of thinking, if I was 18 again and just moved out and was buying my first house, what would I have done? So, a little bit different. I had my
buying
daughter.
Your first house at 18?
Yeah.
You're way ahead of me.
Or, just like getting ready to kind of the steps to it. One thing I really wish I would have known back then was you can buy multifamily with an FHA loan and a VA loan. So I wish I would have known that because I think I would have done the house hacking method. I think that's how I would have liked to have started because you can end up with a fourplex with a low down payment. You live in it for 2 years and then you move out or you stay or whatever you decide to do. But kind of just slowly building up that way, I think is how I would have liked to have started. You could get a really big portfolio with pretty small amount of money out of pocket, really.
Yes. Yeah. So talk a little bit more about the FHA program and how you can buy a duplex, triplex, or even a fourplex and live in one of the units and turn that into an investment property. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I believe the guidelines are a fourplex. Again, I'm not a lender, so I don't know, if it's changed or anything, but you can live, as long as you're living in a portion of the house, you can get an FHA loan to cover. There's still the same restrictions. You still have to pass the same appraisal process. You still have to, qualify for the loan. But you only have to have like 3.5 to 5.5% down versus if you're looking at a strictly investment property, you're going to be starting with 15 down pretty much minimum, but up to 25, 30% down.
Yes.
So it's just a lot cheaper way to get into a property. So still have to do the inspection, still have to do the appraisal, and you still have to qualify for it. But as long as you're living in a portion of the house, you can rent out the other parts of the house. So I think a fourplex would be kind of an ideal situation. You are competing with investors and people who might have cash, but if you can find a good deal, I think it's something that I would, if I was starting all over, that's what I would jump on.
Yeah.
That's great advice.
Yeah, great advice. And one thing, just for clarification, a lot of people that look into investing or starting to invest, they really hone in on the fact that you got to put maybe 20, 25% down. And like Aspen said, with an FHA loan, you can put 3.5% down or even 5% if you wanted to, but you don't have to.
Also, you're getting into your first place with other people paying your mortgage for you.
That's fantastic. I mean, the leveraging the money really works in that scenario. And if you're looking at, let's just say in that scenario, make the numbers easy, a $400,000 property, you're looking at a down payment that's closer to $20,000 versus a down payment that's $80,000. So
really big difference.
Really significant swing there. So I think that's important. And also it's important for the viewers to understand once you get at a certain level of doors is what they call them. It jumps it up from a residential loan or an investment property to a commercial property. So I think it's 5 or more units you get into the commercial realm. And we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about investing 101. So Shannon, what are your thoughts on a first-time investor? If you were to take yourself back to when you were 18 or 20, what would you be doing or thinking about in regard to investing in a property?
I remember the first investment property I bought was a townhouse in Aztec. And that was my second property that I bought, independent of having my own home. And, I think I did things right with it. I didn't get in over my head. I didn't purchase anything that was more money than I could afford to cover if I didn't have it rented at the time. I purchased something that was in pretty good condition, so I didn't have to put a lot into it. Now, of course, I'm a little more, I would say, ambitious now. I could probably purchase something that maybe needed, some work or had to put a little bit of money into it, or I could carry it a little bit longer. But I would say, like, for somebody just getting started, maybe try to find, as you were saying, something that you didn't have to invest a lot of money in to get on the mortgage side, but also maybe something that didn't need a whole lot of investment for your first property. It's different once you have flipped a couple of properties or you have an income coming in on properties, to start looking at something that maybe you're going to put some money into. But at first, I think it makes sense to buy something that you can just kind of put out there and start getting a cash flow. Even if you don't have a cash flow, have it pay for itself. Because until you get a couple of properties, you probably don't have a whole lot of money to be pouring into a home.
Yeah, bankroll. Yes. And I remember that. I remember that little townhome, and that was you did very well on that back in the day. That was a fantastic investment, and it's certainly something to think about when you're starting out. You don't want to dive in head first into a property that if you've never done it before, you don't understand where the hits are coming from, and there are hits along the way. Do
you really want a 20-space trailer park with all the different dynamics? You got a million personalities. You've got a million people that, some people may pay, some people may not. You've got a lot of houses to keep up with. There's just a lot of roofs there to take care of. Yeah. Do you want to do that as your first project? Maybe it makes sense to some people, but I would say for most people, just get your feet wet with something small.
Yeah. Yeah. I would tend to agree with that. Absolutely. Unless you're just a savage. Right.
Right.
Speaking of that,
right.
don't
not everyone is Paul Berry.
I don't want to talk about this. Over here. I don't think I'm on, but I feel attacked.
Yes,
because I just bought a 20 space trailer
park. Yeah,
and it's
that's not for beginners.
It's been a small nightmare.
Yeah, that's next level.
Yeah. It's definitely. Hopefully, it turns out to be an investment, but it's definitely investment in time, energy,
capital,
figuring out what the good thing is. I got a good deal on it, so there's plenty of cash flow that comes out. But when I had my first rental, I did it a little bit differently. And I think I talked about it in a previous podcast, is I kept my starter home and moved up into a different home and kept that starter home as a rental.
Yes.
And I think if you have the ability to buy another house or keep that first one as a rental, what the maintenance has been like, all of the issues that go on with the house, if you're going to have a lot of upkeep, a lot of, usually you don't have a lot of capital you have to put in to fix it up. And then what the mortgage is, you get your rents a little bit higher than that. So it's paying for itself while you're living in your upgraded house. So that's what I did. And then took the leap and bought the 20 park trailer court.
That's right. Yeah. And
don't advise to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
And here we are.
Yeah, here we are.
Right. No, great investments. I mean, you've been making a lot of moves. You've acquired a lot of investment properties over the last
And this gray hair is from
That's right. That's right. Well, and that's the thing is that you don't know what you don't know oftentimes. And sometimes what drives your decisions is that, like, I certainly don't want this, right? I've experienced it. I do not want this, but I do want this. And the best way to dip your toe in is to try it. But you want to dip your toe, right? You don't want to jump in.
Well, and I think, and there's a couple things, if I can jump in.
Sure,
there.
Absolutely.
There's a couple things that a lot of people that are just trying to break in want cash flow. They want it to be an income source. And I would suggest, there may be a discussion after this, but I would suggest if you're looking at buying your first investment property, it probably will not be a cash flow source for you. Think of it in a long-term scenario. like in 10 years, I might have this paid off. I can either just take that rent in or sell it at that point. But don't expect to get that, home run, that huge cap rate, that, that thing that's going to pay all of your bills all at once.
Yes. Yeah. It doesn't work that way in the real world. No,
but everybody's looking for that.
Yeah. Everyone's looking for that home run.
If it was out there, we'd have it.
Yeah. And now, Melissa, talk to us a little bit about what you are thinking when you're looking to purchase your first investment property. Is it something that you're trying to find a fixer-upper, or what strategies should you be thinking about as someone who's looking to buy their first investment property? Is it long-term? Is it a short-term flip? Talk to us about some of those things.
I think it really depends on your skill set. If you have the skills to do basic like contractor work, then I'd say absolutely, let's find a fixer-upper and go head first in that direction. But if you're not somebody that comes in with a lot of skills for DIY type of things, then you're going to have to consider that into what you're purchasing. You might be purchasing something, you may not get what you may feel is a great deal, but you also can immediately put somebody in it and to make a mortgage payment. So I think it really just depends on what your skills are, what you want to get out of it. I do know that there are times whenever you're looking at, maybe somebody, you're also acquiring the tenants that are already in there. And you have to ask about the cap rate. It has to make sense for you, or can you raise the rents? Because if you're now financing something and your payments are going to be more than what the property is bringing in, these are just more questions beyond the brick and mortar.
Yes.
Your financials and how that's going to work out.
Yeah.
In fact, would you say that there's a golden rule for a cap rate, like what you should be looking at? I've heard a couple of different things, but I also I haven't done it myself. So.
Yeah. My experience has been that cap rates vary for areas, but they also vary for the investor. Like some investors, for just to use an example, they'll buy the new Maverick stations for sale, right? But the cap rate is really, really low on it. Yeah. And for our listeners, what a cap rate is you can take actually the net operating income. So let's just say the net operating income in a year, the rents you've received less your expenses is $100,000. Let's just use a big number here. But you're paying $1 million for that property, right? So if you divide the 100,000 by $1 million, it gives you your cap rate, right? Your capitalization rate. If you were to pay cash for that property, how long would it take, or what percentage would you get the return? And in that scenario, it would be a 10% cap rate. Now that's pretty high, but it was just using for an example. The Maverick station, that you've got a tenant there for a solid tenant for 30 years. Yeah. So investors will take a cap rate of 4% on that. Yeah. 4 to 5%. What are your thoughts on that, Aspen?
I've noticed a lot of the really old school investors, especially pre-COVID and like way just before, they want the 10% plus cap rates, and you really just don't see that very much anymore.
Unless it's a mobile home park.
Quiet down.
But I know in Durango, we see 4% cap rates all the time, and that's good. It's a pretty solid investment. As long as it's making money, then that's fine, especially whenever you're talking a lot bigger numbers. If we're talking, it brings in $20,000 a year and you're selling for this, the cap rate might be really good, but your return's not going to be anything crazy. And I don't even really consider a cap rate until you're looking at a lot bigger multifamily units. I'm not going to really consider a cap rate for maybe even a fourplex. I would just kind of see what it's making, see what the payments are going to be, see what your expenses are, and kind of just decide if that return's good for you. But I think cap rate makes sense whenever you're looking like for commercial purposes. Yeah.
That's certainly next level conversations is the cap rates. And cap rates are loaded often because you're dealing with numbers where people are expensing everything, right? Yeah. So your net operating income is really low. And they may not have had it rented out. Let's just say you have a 10plex, right? And they may not have had all the units rented out. So then the cap rate's skewed, right? So there's a lot of variables in there. But for today's purposes, just the basics of investing 101, don't get overly complicated with it. This is your first investment. Think of it like what Aspen just described. Can I make the payment, right? What's the payment going to be? Can I rent it for something that's going to cover that payment? And then what are my likely expenses? What are some expenses you people don't think about it. They go and they rush in and they like buy something, and then they're like, oh my gosh, I have to fix the heater. But what are some expenses that they should plan on, Shannon?
Well, I would always suggest with any property to get a home inspection first, and then you kind of know what you're looking at. Are all the appliances at the end of their functional life? Are all the major components like the roof and the water heater, things of that nature? If everything's holding up pretty well, then you can probably assume that something's going to break here and there along the way. That always happens with an investment property, with any property. But you really need to take that consideration if you're buying something that needs all new components redone right away. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be something you're going to definitely want to plan for. You don't want to buy an old place and say, hey, it makes some pretty good money. Well, yeah, but you're probably going to put $20,000 into it your first year just to keep tenants in there, just to keep them warm.
Yeah.
You don't want to be in a position like that.
And you're scraping together money, right, to get the purchase to happen. And then you're like, oh, gosh.
And maybe that makes sense. I mean, maybe you've got the extra money and maybe you want to fix them up and maybe you want to fix them up and then rent them for more money, but know those things before you get in there because those expenses can add up really, really fast.
Yeah.
Whatever you think it's going to be, add more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like 25% more.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's your rule of thumb, Aspen? If you were to buy just for our listeners, if you were to buy a single family residence, right? Mm-hmm. And let's just say it was a $150,000 home, which we don't see a lot of those anymore, but you can find them. What would be your rule of thumb for kind of a slush fund, a safety net? So
if I am purchasing a house that I'm planning on flipping and, or just not necessarily going to sell, but to burn, refinance and repeat it. I follow the 70% rule. And I know a lot of people are saying you can't find that anymore, but in this area, you definitely can. They're few and far between. So basically I'm just going to use $100,000. If it's $100,000 after everything's said and done, everything's fixed up, everything's nice and done and new, if you can sell it for $100,000, I'm looking to buy it at $70,000 because that gives me a buffer of about 30% for anything that might come up. So I always assume I can pretty much get it done within that range. So that's just kind of a typical single family residence. I try and find it for about 70% of the value if it was fixed up. So that's what I'm looking for a flip. And then if it's a remodeled house, I just base what the rent's going to be on, add whatever. And if the payment makes sense, then I'll just do that.
Yeah.
But always like to have a buffer. And it's some hidden costs. I mean, you have your property taxes, but what if they stop paying their rent?
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Can you afford that
carrying
payment?
costs?
Yeah. That's carrying costs are huge and people do not account for them.
Yeah, that's a great point. So Paul, on your side, you just recently sold a flipper. And you were actually just working as the realtor on it. You didn't have any stake in the game. Right. But talk to us about that whole process. If someone has a goal to just flip a home, right? Maybe they're just trying to bankroll some money to really buy some long-term investments. Talk to us about that process and some of the unforeseen stuff that they may have ran into. And, what are your thoughts there?
Oh, we're running out of time because this is a long story. But they bought a very undervalued in disrepair house. We bought it at a very good price. They fixed it up. It went probably $20,000 over budget. But they ended up gutting and, bringing it down to studs. So that's the difference too. Do you want cosmetic flip? Do you want structural flip? I mean, they're very, very different once you start taking things apart. Mm-hmm. I mean, more things have to go apart. They found mold in that house. There were roof issues. There were plenty of things that they had to do.
And this was a conglomerate of people. I mean,
there was
several partners,
group of people that are doing pretty well. And this was
not cash strapped.
No,
they were able to make the numbers.
They had a very close friend who's a general contractor, and they used a lot of their own people to do the work. So they're they're kind of in the industry as well. But they sold it. So they bought it at $90,000, sold it at $225,000.
Yes. So those deals still exist.
They do exist, and they're few and far between. But if you have, the stars have to align for those.
They are
risky
deals too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very risky.
Yep.
You have to have that intestinal fortitude, right? You have to be able to gut your way through some of those, especially if you're cash strapped. Like if you're cash strapped, I'm not advising that you buy that property.
Yeah, that's not for everyone.
It's not for everybody.
And one of the things to think about that I had to let them know after they started it is some lending have guidelines that if you're going to make a huge profit off a flip, there's a time frame that you cannot sell it before. So we had to make sure that everything was done, that those timeframes did not hinder them selling the house.
Yeah. And to Melissa's point, let's talk a little bit more about something that's more cosmetic. I think you made a great point. Like, you get to look at yourself and evaluate your skill set. Are you good with a hammer?
Yeah.
Do you understand basic construction? And if you don't, if you just say, look, I know what things need to happen to make it look pretty, then play to your strength, right? Because you can find properties that with just some cosmetic things can really increase the value. So if you were looking for your first time investment property, would you be looking for the best home on the street? Or what would you be looking for, Melissa?
I would, because of my skill sets, I would be looking for something that's been well taken care of, but maybe just needs some cosmetic updates. That's where I am in my journey. Because I know I would have to hire out everything else, and that cuts into
your profit.
My profit.
Yeah.
So that's what I would be looking for.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point, because we run across those properties on occasion where, grandma and grandpa have lived there for 60 years, right? And they have taken care, they have serviced that cooler every year, and that heater, and they've always taken care of the plumbing in the yard and everything like that. But it's just, they haven't updated anything.
They still have the avocado green carpet.
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And metal cabinets.
And the metal cabinets.
I just removed 1,700 square feet of avocado green carpet.
So you're very familiar with that. Yeah. But the home, did they take care of the home? Yes. So it was in good repair, but it just was dated. Right. Yeah. And so I think that, to your point, if you're getting into the investment game and you're aware of your skill set, right, and it plays more to, I know what it looks like pretty, and I know we can make it pretty, then find a home that has been very well loved over the years, and doesn't have a ton of deferred maintenance. Maybe you don't get such an upside swing, but you get a really good, solid investment.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think on that too, some people might say, they'll take that property and they do kind of like a Band-Aid flip, if you will, on it. And then they expect top dollar for it. But once, somebody really gets in there, starts doing inspections and looking at things like, well, I can tell this is just, you just put some paint on top of it, or
the landlord special where they paint over the.
Yes, exactly.
Over the bugs.
Yeah. Paint over and the hinges, right? Half paint the hinges.
Yeah. Or use like, you can't tell me you got updated doors whenever they're just from another property.
Yeah.
Right.
Like stuff like that. Like, don't cut corners. You can't expect to make a ton of money if you're not putting the effort in there.
Yeah.
So.
And that makes a lot of sense. And of course, back, I think it was Aspen, it was the 70% rule, right? That's where getting with a realtor is really important. Any one of us would be happy to come out and help you on your journey with investing in your first property, because knowing what the asset is worth right now and what its potential is huge for your strategy. So be sure to keep that in mind. Get with a realtor, any one of us or any realtor that you're working with, and have them do a market analysis of what it is today and what it will be once it's done. Of course, be very specific about the upgrades that you're going to do. We're running out of time, but I want to allow for a couple minutes on this speed round, because I think it's important. And here's the speed round. Paul, I'm going to start with you. What's better for your first investment? A flipper, a single family resident rental that you hold on to, or a multifamily? What are your thoughts?
Any of those could be good. I would say if it's paying for itself, you have the ability to, weather the storm when they come. As long as the rents cover your costs, then try any of them. If a deal comes along, give it a try.
Great advice. Melissa?
I would say whatever appeals to you. If it's your first one, you're probably going to make that purchase with your heart a little bit. You're going to want to see something that you like, that you can see yourself taking care of, because this other person may not take care of it. So I just think whatever you like. It might be a single family residential property. That way you can continue caring for it whenever the renters are gone.
But really, it was something that resonates with you.
Yeah.
Yep. Aspen, same question.
I would say anything from a single family to a fourplex that you can live in for 2 years. Me and my husband started with flipping, and it's a lot of work and it's expensive. And he came from a construction background. My parents have flipped houses as long as I can remember. We moved every few years doing it. So we both had different skill sets that allowed us to be able to do the work ourselves. If we had to have paid out there's no way we could have made it work whenever we were so young. So I would say anything from a fourplex to a single family that you can live in for 2 years and then move, and just, plan for every 2 years from when you're, let's stick with 18 to 30. I mean, that's 6 properties right there.
Yeah.
So that's a great start to the rest of your life.
Yep. And single family, well, let me say this. There are tax advantages to it being your primary residence.
I was going to say, avoid the capital gains.
Yeah, avoid the capital gains at all costs. Shannon?
Well, I think all your advice was good. And that's what I think my advice would be, is just don't get in over your head. It's going to look different for every person. Some people have a little more skill set. Some people have a little bit more money. Maybe the fourplex works if you can live in it, or maybe it works even if it's covering all the bills and it's in good condition. So I think that's why it's important really to talk to a realtor. Let them know honestly where you're at, financially, what your abilities are, and let somebody help you try to find something and make a good decision on what's the best place to start.
Great advice, Shannon. I love that. And I'll just round us out and say I agree with all of that. And I think you should keep it at 4 units or less. And really what resonates with you, and to Paul's point, what does it pay for itself, right? I'm an advocate for less flipping and more holding on to the asset once you acquire the asset, especially in today's market. But really find one that resonates with you, go after it, get the help of a realtor, get the help of a local mortgage broker, really understand it, but take it into bite-sized portions, and it's really not overwhelming. So to all your listeners out there, we hope you take that next step, because it really is the fastest way to build wealth in America. So thank you for that discussion. That was fantastic. On to my favorite part of the podcast, which is called the Lyons Pride. And this is where we highlight someone or an entity or a group in the community that does great things. As a group of working professionals, we all roll our sleeves up here and try to make our community better. And Shannon has the draw today on who would you like to highlight?
So I would like to bring attention to the Farmington Regional Animal Shelter. They do great work. If you all remember, 10 years ago or so, we did have a killing animal shelter. Right now they do very, very hard work to make sure that no animals are put down. And it's not just the people that work there. It takes the entire community. They have volunteer programs. You can go in, you can walk dogs. You can, if you ever get a chance, you can just take down your old hand-me-down dog beds or bowls or things like that, or even dog food, that you might have, or cat food, treats. When you're at Sam's Club, you can stop by and pick up an extra thing of dog snacks and take it down there to them. They're always looking for help. They're always looking for ways to raise funds. They're always looking for people to volunteer. It really does take the entire community to keep these animals clean and safe and taken care of. They do their best to make sure that every animal walks out of there fixed, so that we don't continue the problem. They help with so many things, and the people down there work tirelessly, I think, to make that happen. It's made a world of difference from what we had a few years ago to what we have today. It's a beautiful facility, and there's so many people that work hard there. So there are 2 gals where, Amber Francisco and Michelle Evans, that I personally know work there. They're not the only ones. There are a lot of people that it takes to make that place work nicely. But them particularly, I know that those gals work hard. I know that they're tirelessly, they really do care. That's not just a job.
It's a labor of love.
That's right.
I mean,
they're not there because they're making millions of dollars. I don't know what they make, but they're not making millions of dollars. They're not there because, it's a really, wildly advantageous position in our community or anything. I know that just taking care of animals that are sick or dealing with people that are having to give them up, that's all hard work. That's all really, really hard work. So these people do it because they love it, and there's a lot of volunteers, and I want to encourage our community to get out and volunteer and do more to help. And, hopefully we keep that going and just make it better and better every year.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you for that. And it's Amber and Michelle, correct?
Yeah.
And the animal shelter. Obviously they do wonderful things in our community. What a great thing to highlight. Shannon, we appreciate that. Welcome to the Lyons Pride. Just know that we see you and we recognize what you do in our community. We want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. My wife and daughter actually went and walked some dogs a couple weeks ago.
Everybody should do that.
And it was
everybody's got a little bit of time.
Yeah, absolutely. What a great way to give back. And if you can, donate some blankets, donate some food, take some bowls down there. Just do what you can to help, because they really are, and oftentimes a thankless job.
Yes.
So we just want to say thank you for that. And we're wrapping up this episode. If you want to reach out to any of us, go to sjcbroker.com and you can find all of our contact information. We would love to work with you, whether it's residential or commercial space. If you're a buyer or a seller, we have some awesome guides. So just reach out to us. We'll send those to you for free. We'd love to have a conversation about real estate in San Juan County. And we just enjoy working in this community. It's a fantastic community. We roll our sleeves up, and you want to stay tuned to the next episode of The Den. The next one's going to be fun. It's inspection horror stories, the things we've seen over the years and some of the stories we have to share. So stay tuned to that next episode, and thank you for joining us at The Den.
Thank you for listening to The Den, powered by the Lyons Group. Hit the subscribe button to keep informed on real estate happenings. If you'd like to learn more about the Lyons Group, visit sjcbroker.com. Complex markets require complex strategies. The Lyons Group can give you a true advantage in any market. Whether you're buying or selling, residential or commercial, contact us directly at sjcbroker.com. We're time-tested experts with a client-first approach, and we'll see you next time in The Den.